I'd like to share with you a testimony about what God has been doing in my life and in my wife's life during the last year. Because we've gone through some very difficult times, and I'm going to share that with you. I mean, some of it relates to the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, but other things that have happened even before that have really turned our whole lives upside down. And yet, in the midst of the turmoil that we've gone through, we have still seen God's faithfulness operating. And we're learning that even in the midst of difficulty and troubles, He is there still with us. The scripture I want to share with you is from John chapter 14, verse 27. And Jesus said here, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." And then the other scripture I want to read from is John chapter 16, verse 33. And Jesus said, "I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world." See, in this world we will have tribulation, but we always know that He has overcome the world. He has overcome all the sorrow and disappointment and hurt and tragedy in this world. Now we're living as a world, not just my country, United States, not just Kenya, but we're living in unprecedented times. You know, in the last 7 months, we've seen this coronavirus basically take over the world, infecting people in every single nation. I believe right now there's 10 million people plus worldwide who have contracted the virus. 5 million in the United States alone. We've seen 220,000 people die from this virus starting back in February and March. And it's not just here, it's everywhere in the world people are dying. I believe the worldwide death rate is well over 1 million. And I know this has impacted Kenya too, because I'm always in contact with our leaders and pastors, even if we can't be there like we wanted to be there for this conference. But we can't because of the travel restrictions due to COVID. But we know it's been hard. I know that the government locked down large portions of your country. I know that for weeks, even months, people had difficulty traveling. There were curfews. Churches could not have services. And when they reopened, finally, they were limited in the number of people they could have, like we have the same problem in the United States. Even people had to have their temperatures taken before you could even go into a church service. And a lot of pastors did not have enough money to buy a thermometer to take somebody's temperature. So, I know in our country, the unemployment rate, number of people unemployed as a percentage of the population went up from like 3-4% to 20% in a month. And even today, the economy is beginning to reopen. It's still 10%, 12% of the people do not have jobs. And then in our country, there was racial unrest. A young black man was choked to death by some police officers in the state of Minnesota back in May. And then we've had demonstrations about that. And there's been a lot of turmoil, a lot of people upset about what's going on in our country. And we're also having a very difficult presidential election coming up in November that has created a lot of division in our country. So people feel this uncertainty. And I know it's the same thing in Kenya. People are not sure about their future because it's hard enough to survive just in normal times. But then you add the coronavirus, the COVID-19 problems, the shutdown, the quarantines people are going through, the effects on the economy, and it's made it so hard for people to even survive. So who could blame you for feeling anxious, for feeling anxiety about your health, the health of your family, your businesses, your churches? We're facing a crisis that I have not seen in my lifetime, and I'm 66 years old. And yet, for Christians, we know that despite the fact that we have to accept that there is going to be anxiety and maybe a little fear given this unrest, but we have to see this balance between comprehending the reality of the suffering going on in the world right now, but also living in a place of peace and being still with the Lord, knowing that He is going to keep the peace in our hearts that we need to survive. We have His peace even in the storms, because we know in this world, everybody at some point will have suffering. Everybody at some point is going to have tribulation. You cannot escape it. I don't care how much money, how wealthy you are, how healthy you think you are, you will have crisis in your life at some point. But we have to look at things with an internal perspective. We have to totally trust God with our earthly lives. We also need to take advantage of this turbulent time to be able to share the love of God with people, because one thing I can tell you is people are open right now to receiving His love because they're hurting so much. And when you're hurting and you're afraid and lonely, yeah, your heart will be open to change. And the change is the life of Christ coming into us. It's the gospel, the good news that we share. And I think people are hungry for that now, because everything that they've been putting their trust in, everything they've been relying on, has been stripped away. And now they just have themselves, and they realize their need. Maybe they didn't know they had a need for God before, but now they know they have a need. And let me tell you my story. I've been a lawyer for 41 years, and I've been successful in that career. But about 13 years ago, I started to have a real heart and a desire to do mission trips. And I think it was like 2008, 2007, I went on my first real big mission trip to Colombia with my wife, only because she had gone there 6 months before me by herself with a team. And I realized when she got back that like her life had changed. And before that, I didn't even want to do missions. I didn't think I needed to do anything beyond the little ministries I had right here in the United States where I live. But then I went with her, and it changed my life. I went to Colombia twice in the same year. I went to Brazil the next year. I've done ministry in Mexico quite a bit. In 2010, I went to Israel. 2011, I went to India on a mission trip. And starting in 2012, I started coming to Kenya. That was my first trip, 2012 to Kenya. And I fell in love with the nation of Kenya. The point where I started going twice a year until last year. I think I've been to Kenya 9 times. And my wife and I started a nonprofit, I guess you call it NGO, non-government organization, called Rainbow Transformation Ministries to fund some of the things that we're doing overseas. And God has blessed it. Well, 2019, I turned 65 years old, and I decided to, I would call it semi-retire from my profession of being a lawyer. And what that means is I shut my business down, and I had a physical location and attorneys and people to work for me. And I shut that down, and I just started working maybe 8 or 10 hours a week from my house, like 1 day a week, part-time. And one of the reasons I did it is I want to have more time to, deepen my walk with the Lord, but also to do mission trips. And in April of last year, Cindy and I went to New Zealand for a month, and we spent that time just soaking in the Father's presence through the Father Heart Ministry in New Zealand, which has impacted our lives and led us to most of these teachings you're hearing here, or what we learned from them. And we were there with only 30 people and the leaders of that ministry, and they just poured into us for 30 days. Can you imagine that being poured into every day practically for a month? And we just felt so full when we came back. And we had set up a trip to Kenya in October. We're going to bring a team there, and we were going to do 2 pastor schools, just like you're doing right now. And we were also going to go out and do conferences. We had a lot of big plans for that trip in October. And to get ready for that trip, I went to the Philippines with a team from our organization, HIM, in August. And I spent, 11 days there, and it was very powerful. to see God move in a country I'd never been to before. But I saw the power of God, and the sharing about the love of God and the love of the Father was so impactful for the people there. Well, on September 6th of last year, my life and my wife's life and my family's life were just turned completely upside down. Because on that night, my wife was at a little celebration that my daughter Kirsten was putting on at a little duplex, like 2 units combined into one, that she had just moved into and was renting very close to my home. And the duplex had a little deck in front, and there was a little bit of a view of the ocean from the deck because I live in a beach town called Encinitas, California. And they went out to see the sunset on the deck, and my wife leaned against the railing, and the railing gave way because there was dry rot. It had not been well maintained by the owner, and she fell off the edge of that deck about 12 feet down to concrete, the concrete driveway below. She hit a wall with her face going down and then landed on her back, and there was blood everywhere. And my 2 daughters saw it happen. Thank God they were okay, but they really thought my wife had died because she looked unresponsive at first, and there was blood everywhere. They called an ambulance. They took her to the hospital. She was semi-conscious at that point in time, but had no idea where she was, what was going on. She had a very, very bad concussion. And I met with the doctors after they did some tests, and they said, look, your wife has very significant internal bleeding. Her liver's been punctured. Her kidneys have been punctured. One of her kidneys has been punctured, and if we don't do an operation tonight, she may not live. Will you give us permission to operate immediately? And of course, I said yes. And they said, we don't think her kidney is going to make it. And thank God she has 2 kidneys because she can live with one. But I was thinking, I don't want to live, or my wife to live with 1 kidney. I want 2. So we started praying. And I remember they took me and my daughter into a waiting room, and we waited for about 3.5 hours, 4 hours while they did this emergency procedure. And it didn't end until like 1 in the morning. And finally the nurse came in and said that she had made it. And she was, in the intensive care unit, and we could go see her. And so we went in and saw her, and she looked horrible, of course. After this, her face was black and blue, and she had cuts and scrapes all over her body. She was kind of semi-conscious, but she lived. And the next day they had to do another surgery. She had broken many bones in her back, and she broke bones in her neck. L5 vertebra in her back was broken. She had fractures in her face and her hands. But the thing she needed immediately was what they call a spinal fusion. They actually had to go in and fuse 4 of her vertebrae together to stabilize her back so she could walk again. And thank God we had one of the best surgeons to do that at the hospital we were visiting. God really was in that all the way. Well, the surgery was a success. And my wife soon began to recover. And she's a very, very brave person. She never complained. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks, getting taken care of. She was in the intensive care unit for 7 days. How many intensive help, because her heart had issues. She had a partially collapsed lung. She had a lot of medical problems. But by the end of the 3 weeks, when she got to the hospital, she was starting to walk a little bit. She needed some help, and she wore a big neck brace and a back brace for 3 months before she could take them off. So she was like an invalid. She really needed to be taken care of, by somebody else. And that meant me. And I actually thank God that I wasn't working full-time as a lawyer anymore, because I was there every day in the hospital. I spent the night there a couple times. And when she came home, I had to help take care of her, take her to all her doctor's appointments, help make her food, get her bed ready for her, because she was unable to move very well with all these braces she had to wear. And I had to cancel, for me and Cindy, that trip to Kenya. Now, we were able to send the rest of our team, thank God. People still came forward and decided to go without us, even though we were the leaders. But we had to cancel the 2 pastor schools. We didn't go. And I was really disappointed, because that was what I thought I was supposed to be doing in this season of my life. I was going to do all these mission trips. And I missed that trip. And it was hard, because I'd gone to Kenya every year since 2012. And I love you people, and I want to minister to you, and I want to be with my pastor friends and people that we have such great relationships with from Kenya. Well, the first few months were difficult because I went from being what I thought would be this amazing missionary to being the caregiver for my wife. And things went on without us. But I thought, well, 2020 would be a good year. She'll be better. Maybe she won't travel with me on mission trips, but I'm going to start doing, I'll do some trips even without her. I'll go with other, teams. I don't need my wife to be with me necessarily, although I enjoy it when she can come. And so I signed up for a trip to Mexico. I was going to go to maybe the Philippines in the summer again. I was definitely planning on going back to Kenya this October, the very week that you're doing this pastor school. And I had all these plans. And Sydney was getting better. I'd say by January and February, she was getting close to normal. She was driving again. They took the braces off. She looked great. And yes, she was very strong. She's a very strong, fit person, and she healed very quickly. And the doctors were amazed. They were absolutely amazed that she recovered so fast. They thought she might be paralyzed. They thought she might have brain damage from her head hitting the ground. They thought so many bad things would happen. They thought she would lose a kidney. Well, you know what? No paralysis, no brain damage, and a kidney healed all by itself. Because so many people came together and prayed for her. The prayers of the saints are amazing. We had a group we set up on Facebook. We called it Team Cindy, just for people to pray for her and for us to keep them informed on what was going on, so we didn't have to tell everybody separately how she was doing. And it was a private group, which meant you only got to be in the group if you were invited. And we ended up with 250 people in the group, all supporting Cindy. People were messaging me all day, can I be part of the group? And we added them, and we had 250 people that knew her and loved her and prayed for her. And believe me, we saw the results of that prayer. We saw her get restored. We saw her miraculously being healed. Well, she's getting better finally. I remember in March, Cindy and I went to a hotel to celebrate our birthdays there, a day apart, 11th and 12th of March, and we had a nice dinner together, and I was going to watch a basketball game afterwards, the NBA, our American Basketball League. I was going to watch it on television, and then the news came on, and it said that because of COVID, some NBA players had been tested positive for COVID, that they'd canceled the season or suspended it. So no basketball. And the next day, the governor of our state, where we live, issued a shutdown order that said we basically could not leave our homes except for essential things like getting gasoline or getting food, important things. But basically, we were all quarantined. We didn't know how long. We thought it might be a week or two. It ended up being like almost 2 months of being almost unable to leave our homes except for the most important, significant things. And not only that, people like Kenya, has happened there. I know it's been hard. People lost jobs. Money I had invested in my retirement plan lost value because the American stock market went down. A lot of bad things were happening. They closed most of the schools that children go to, and they had to learn remotely. Thank God we have internet in most homes that people can do that, but it's still not the same as being there in school. But I have 2 grandchildren, and my daughter is a single mom. She lives close to us, and we do a lot of help, babysitting for her. At that time, they were 5 years old and 3 years old, and they were going to preschool during the day so my daughter could work. Well, the preschool closed because of COVID, and there was no place to take them, and she needed to still work. So we took them, and we became their babysitters, like 4 or 5 days a week, and some overnights. And I love my grandkids, and I enjoy being with them, but it wasn't easy all the time. I'm a little bit older now, 66. I don't have the energy I had when I was much younger. And I thought I'd be in the mission field in the spring of 2020. I went from being from being the professional lawyer that I am to being a babysitter, basically, for 2 small children. And it wasn't easy, even with the love I have for them. But, there was a stripping, I feel like, that took place. Like, my identity for so many years was being a lawyer, because, men get a lot of identity from their jobs, from their professions. And I think it's true with Kenyans. I mean, I meet so many pastors and leaders, and they want to have nice titles. I'm an apostle. I'm a bishop. I'm a double apostle. Why? Because it makes us feel important. I'm not saying it's not wrong to be an apostle or a bishop, but the titles mean nothing. The only thing that really matters is that we're sons and daughters, right? But there was a stripping that took place, because the things I looked through for identity, my missions work, my ministry, my business, I basically walked away from them for this season. For my wife being sick, being injured in this accident, and then also now dealing with the COVID thing. And, I've always been a builder. I like to build. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about building ministries, building a law practice, building a business, building a family. And in the missions field, I felt like God was building something through us in Kenya. Building relationships, helping us start these pastor schools so we could really, really impart to you God's heart for you, his Father's love for you. And that became part of my identity. And so there was a stripping, because I had to realize that my identity was not in what I did. My identity was not being a missionary. My identity was not being a lawyer. My identity wasn't even being a husband, father, and grandfather. My identity was that I'm a son of God. That's my identity, and that identity will never change, regardless of what is going on around me. Well, something else happened that was also difficult and devastating for me personally. So, I told you my wife got hurt in September of 2019. In early February, when she was starting to feel better, I finally went in for my annual checkup with my doctor, and I had some blood tests done. And it turned out that when the blood test came back, there was something called a PSA test, which has to do with issues with a man's prostate, which is a little organ that's very close to your bladder. It has to do with reproduction and other things, but an important little organ. And it normally, for a man, your PSA levels should be like 1 to 3. And if they get above that, it could mean you have prostate cancer, which means you have cancer in your prostate that needs to be taken care of, either through surgery or radiation or chemotherapy. And that treatment can be very, very difficult, particularly for men, because it affects your whole reproductive system. Well, my PSA levels in prior tests, my annual physicals, the years before, had always been 2.5, 3, 3.5. Well, I got the blood test back in February and it had gone up to 6.5, which is a strong indicator I may have had prostate cancer. And so my doctor referred me to another doctor who specialized in this type of thing, called a urologist, and scheduled a consultation so they could do an investigation. The problem is that the doctor didn't have any appointments for 3 months available. And so even though it was February, I was not able to even have an appointment to see him until the very end of April. And then COVID hit, and most doctors' offices and hospitals were not taking people in for personal visits unless you actually were sick with COVID. And so I ended up talking to him on a video conference. And he said, well, yeah, we need to determine whether or not this test means nothing or whether you have prostate cancer. And so it was in the back of my mind. This whole time I was waiting, for this appointment. Like, do I have prostate cancer? My father had prostate cancer. And so I knew because he'd had it, there was a higher likelihood that I would have it too, because it's genetic, it runs in families. So I was a little nervous, but I wasn't like terribly concerned, but I was a little worried, a little anxious. And he said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have you take this test called, this procedure called an MRI. And what they do is they put you in in a tube, and they shoot electromagnetic waves on your body, and through those waves and computers, they scan your body and they can see actually what's going on with your internal organs. And he says, well, do that first, because that will show us if there might be cancer. And if it shows that there might be cancer, then we go farther and we do what we call a biopsy. And they actually stick a needle into your prostate, and they take 14 or 15 samples, which is not a fun thing to go through, believe me. And then they put them under a microscope to see if there's really cancer there. Well, I had the MRI at the end of May, and I got the results. And the results were bad. Basically, the MRI said I had prostate cancer. And not just that, but maybe a significant level of prostate cancer that could grow, could kill me, maybe if it spread outside of my prostate. And so when I saw the results, and the doctor then scheduled the biopsy, but it was more than 3 weeks later that I had a biopsy. I mean, I was starting to get concerned, because all I could think about is, well, I know my dad got treated for a year with radiation for prostate cancer, and he was very sick. And I know that, another option, if they don't do radiation or chemotherapy, is they just remove your prostate altogether, which also has other problems that could affect you negatively for the rest of your life. Not something you really want to do. And so all these things were coming through my head. Oh, I have cancer. What are they going to do? What are the procedures? And here in the middle of COVID, my wife's still recovering from her accident. Country shut down. COVID. All the restrictions were going through. If I had an operation, my wife wouldn't be able to even see me in the hospital, because they weren't letting visitors in at that time. So for 3 weeks, I was a little bit nervous before the biopsy. And I remember the Lord spoke to me. He said, get everybody you know to pray for you. Now, normally I would have a meeting at my house or somewhere, and I'd have all my good friends. And I have many, many people I know from ministry and friendship who are very anointed in healing. People that have powerful healing ministries. And I thought normally I would have them in my house, but I couldn't because of COVID, because it wasn't safe to have a large gathering. And so I did it through Zoom. I did an internet phone call with people showing up on videos. And I did 2 of them, and I ended up having like 25 people on these calls, all praying. Many of them affiliated with our organization, HIM, Harvest International Ministry, but many of them also close friends here. And they prayed, and I did feel the peace and comfort of the Lord. And even though there was part of me that was willing to accept that I may have cancer, I had to come to that point of accepting, okay, I may have cancer, and I can live with that. I will accept if that's, what God is destined for me at this point. I will accept it. But I had this hope that I was going to get healed. I had this hope that he was going to take care of it. And I felt a little buoyed, uplifted after getting that prayer. It was very comforting. And I remember the day before I had the biopsy, I remember the first time I really started feeling some anxiety. Maybe, I don't know if it was the fear of the biopsy, because it's not a fun procedure to go through. It's very uncomfortable. And, there's some things that from the biopsy, you're going to have some difficulties with some things for a week or 2. But I think it was just that uncertainty. And so there was this kind of anxiety building inside of me, despite my prayers and whatever. And that's okay, because God knows our hearts. He knows what we're about. He knows where we're going. He knows our end, and he knows our beginning, and he knows everything in between. And he knows when we're anxious and fearful, and we can't hide it from him. So I was willing to and able to just pray to him and say, Father, I'm feeling afraid. Father, I'm nervous. I don't know what's going to happen next. But I felt his comfort come on me when I did that. Well, the next morning, I had the biopsy, and it wasn't fun. But fortunately, I didn't have any terrible side effects from it. And they told me that I would get the results. Usually what they do in this particular hospital, they actually send you an email with a link to get the results, even before the doctors tell you. And so they said it might be 7-10 days. So I was like, oh, and I got to wait even longer to find out the results. Well, Like 3 or 4 days later, this email pops up, and it's from the hospital, and it's with the results of the biopsy. And so I opened up the email, I went to the link, and I looked at the results of the test. And it basically, they took 14 samples. And in each one, it said whether there was cancer or not. And if it's cancer, it'll say cancer located or determined. If not, it says benign, which means no cancer. So I looked at sample 1, benign. Sample 2, benign. Sample 3, benign. Sample 4, benign. Sample 5, benign. On and on and down. All 14 samples, benign. I didn't have cancer. Now, maybe the MRI was wrong. No tests are 100% perfect. But I actually believe there probably was cancer found in the MRI because they saw it. They saw it on the image, but they just needed to confirm it with the biopsy. And then it was gone the day of the biopsy, and I think God healed me. I truly believe he miraculously healed me, just like he healed my wife, just as he saved her life. Because many of us had visions when she fell of seeing angels hold her up before she hit the concrete to save her life. And so what I've learned is that God is good even in the midst of the turmoil. He knew he was going to heal me, even if I wasn't even sure, even if I was willing to accept the fate of having cancer. But he knew his heart was to heal. And I believe the prayers of all the people that joined to pray for me and Cindy, to pray for her when she fell, to pray for my cancer diagnosis, all of those prayers were heard by our Heavenly Father. And, you know, it says in Romans chapter 8 that God causes all things to work for the good for those who love him, are called according to his purpose. And that means that he can take the bad things in life and somehow he can turn them around and use them for good. And what I learned from this is that in a period of forced rest, because that's what we've been going through. Now things have opened up and now we're able to do some more traveling, but not internationally, but at least a little bit here, and more of a normal life, even though we wear masks outside and social distance and so forth. Don't have a lot of people over at home, that sort of thing. I learned is that in this place of forced rest, I was still loved as a son. I was still loved just for who I am, not for what I do, not for my identity as missionary, lawyer, father, grandfather. No, as Joel, just me, loved. And it was okay to do nothing. It was okay to not have a social network and go out and go to church services and meetings and all the things I was planning on doing. I canceled every single mission trip this year. None of them are happening. I had 4 trips, but it's okay because he's still with me. He's still with me. His love is always there for us, regardless of what we do. He loves us because of who we are, not what we do. And the other thing I learned too is that, we can make our plans. We can make our plans, and that's okay. He wants to join us in that planning, but he also has the right to redirect them. I had plans to do one thing this year, and now his plan is to do something different. And the interesting that happened to me was that because I couldn't travel overseas, God opened doors to still use the money that was being donated to our ministry to help the people in Kenya. Because it was funny, when I was planning to go to Kenya in this spring, I had a trip planned that we canceled, of course, because of COVID, as well as the one in October. I was trying to raise money on Facebook. I had a Facebook drive to raise money, and I only raised like $100 US. That's like 10,000 Kenyan shillings. But then when COVID hit and God put it in my heart to start directing money to help feed people in Kenya, because many of our leaders there have started doing feeding programs and just help our leaders survive this financial crisis, people started giving money without me even asking for it. We ended up raising well over 4,000 USD. That's like 400,000 Kenyan shillings. And it just came without anybody asking for it. People just out of the goodness of the heart just decided to start giving us money. And that money was redirected to Kenya. So even though we're not there with you, God's using that money to help feed people, to take care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, to help ministries, and to also pay for the school that you're doing right now. And all it's coming from the ministry. It's all coming from the generous donations of people that care about Kenya and about you. So he redirected things. I thought we would be in Kenya right now ministering to you in person. But he said, no, do a video school. And it was a great idea. Bishop Francis came up with. And I was like, yes, if we can get videos to you and you can watch us, it won't be quite the same as being there. I know, because I want to mingle with you. I want to eat with you. I want to pray for you. I want to touch you and hold you. I want to impart the Father's love to you by touch. I can't do that. But you can still see our hearts and hear these teachings. And you know what? It's also giving a great opportunity for our Kenyan pastors to step up and lead and teach too, particularly those that have been experiencing more and more of the love of the Father in their heart. His ways are not our ways. His purposes are not our purposes, but we know that if he works all things to the good for those that know him and are called according to his purpose, that he will take care of us and he will meet our needs and he will bless us and we will prosper in him. That's his heart, is that we be blessed. And we just trust him, even in the midst of crisis. That's the cutting point. And you know what? It's okay to tell him that you're afraid. It's okay to tell him that you're feeling anxious. It's okay to tell him that your faith may not be as strong as you'd like it to be. And he knows everything about you anyway. And you know what? He gives faith to the faithless. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. We don't make up faith. He gives it to us. He gives us everything. Life. In him, we have life. So we can rest in the peace of knowing that we'll always be with him in eternity. And no matter what happens in this world, he will never be taken away from us. That love and that relationship with our Heavenly Father. And we bless you in Jesus' name.